time for the visit with the person of high strangeness. In the year 2000, I went to film a series of several shows that's going to be shown on my webpage and in other places on the internet. And the name of those shows are called Siberia Uncensored. And so, since a lot of you don't have computers, we thought it was only appropriate that we would share the inserts from the internet show with you. And the one we have picked to share with you first is government abduction and mind control. And the gentleman is, well, anyway, he's sitting there a certain way because he did really not want to be identified. So I hope you enjoy this show. And I'm sorry I popped on you a little early, but then mind control, what can I tell you? So enjoy. Cool. Yeah. I guess we're still setting up. That's okay. Now I'd like to speak to you about the format of this show for one moment here. I'm going to take you out of the safety and comfort zone of your mind today, and so therefore everything is going to be a little different. The topic is military abduction and mind control, and the guest that we have today, for reasons that will become obvious to you, wants to stay anonymous, and so therefore it's going to be somewhat different than what you are used to. Some of the friends might totally understand what we're talking about, and others might think it's somewhat far-fetched. The point for the show here is to get closure on some things, and also to make you, the general public, and the friends out there think. So without any further delay, I'm going to introduce you to my guest, Oliver. How are you today, Oliver?
Well, feeling a little nervous, a little paranoid, Lilian, given the subject matter and what I've been through for the last 15 years. But it's a story that I need to get out, and so I'll feel better once we've talked about this, I'm sure.
It'll be just fine. Just pretend we're sitting in my living room, and we've tried to talk about this for a long time, and we always said it was never the right time. So today is the right time. So in your own words, would you, I'm going to let you set the pace. If you could maybe go back in time a little bit and set us up and, you know, at the beginning, where you want to start with and where you want to go with it.
Okay. Well, my story starts in 1984. America, mostly Costa Rica at the time, working with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. My task was to find out more information about people who were smuggling drugs, primarily cocaine, people who were bringing it into the country because it's not grown there, who was processing it, who was exporting it, and in the process I found out the information. I found that the locals were quite willing to work with me because they didn't like what was happening to the country. The crime rate had escalated quite a bit since the whole Iran-Contra thing had started, and so I was able to gather quite a bit of information fairly easily. I did find out who was doing what, who was bringing in the coca paste from South America, who owned the airstrips where it was flown into, who transported it to the laboratories where it was processed into cocaine, and who then exported it back out of Costa Rica into the United States.
Now, that was during the Bush-Reagan era.
Right. Reagan was president at the time. The Reagan administration was deeply involved in the whole Iran-Contra business. There's still a lot of information which has not yet come out. Had the information been available to the public and presented through the media, it probably would have brought down that whole administration. And because I knew that information, I became a threat. At the time I was quite young, naive, probably a little bit stupid, maybe sometimes a lot of bit stupid. I was probably somewhat conceited and maybe even a little arrogant. And so I did some things that were probably not the thing to do for my own safety. I had a partner that I worked with. One of the things that we were supposed to do was find laboratories. And one of the ways that we were going to do that was by selling ether, which is a chemical used in the processing of cocaine. So we had a truckload of ether that the DEA had seized a few months previously and had sitting in a warehouse. We put the word out that we had ether available, and we located a buyer. My partner met with the buyers, saw the color of their money to make sure that they, were legitimate buyers. We checked them out, found out that, yes, they were indeed in the business, and the night before he was to take our down payment for the delivery, he mysteriously had a heart attack and died. That was kind of my wake-up call. And then I was in the U.S. at the time, and the next day I had people outside my house, guys that looked like thugs, maybe mafia-type thugs, guys like that. And I decided that, I'd gotten into something that maybe I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
So I disappeared. I left in the middle of the night with my family, and I had cleaned out all the money in my bank account and spent the next 6 months being pursued by these people.
The heart attack scenario is even popular these days. Yes, some of the other friends that
Right.
heart attacks.
Yeah, I was never able to get any proof that he had been murdered, but, he had no health problems prior to that point, and he was not that old, and it was quite unexpected. And then the fact that there were people obviously watching me the very next day indicated that something was amiss. So I spent the next 6 months hiding underground, traveling under an assumed identity. I was going from job to job. I wouldn't keep a job for more than 2 weeks, then I would pack up and move to another place.
And you had your family with you all this time?
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been real hard on you.
It was, and it was hard on them. And I didn't know what the solution was. I didn't trust the police or the FBI, or, I didn't trust anyone. Finally, I had an attorney and also an accountant where I had lived previously, and I discovered that after I would tell my attorney where to forward my mail, these thugs would show up, and they would threaten employers, family, neighbors, anybody they could find that they thought might tell them where I was. They never identified themselves. On occasion, they actually threatened people with guns. One time they threatened the wrong person, who pulled out his own gun and pointed at them, and their license plate, we got their license plate number because they drove the same car most of the time, but the plate didn't show up. It was a non-existent plate. It was not in the computers anywhere.
Yeah.
So these guys were obviously connected somehow to the government, or maybe they just had bogus plates. So after 6 months of hiding and running, I decided that I'd had enough of it. The stress was affecting my health, and there didn't seem to be an end in sight, so I sent my family away to someplace safe and called all the friends I had and to see who would come and help me. Finally got one that was interested in helping me.
Yeah, times like that, your friends are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will always have a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude and respect for that friend, because he did risk a lot to help and had to endure a lot because of his willingness to help me. And my basic plan, which was not real bright, was basically to let them find me and shoot it out with them, They obviously, had no official law enforcement capacity, so I wasn't afraid of really getting arrested. I was afraid of getting arrested by someone else and then them possibly turning me over to these guys, or those guys then knowing where I was. And I thought that, and at that point I was so stressed out that I was willing to go to that extreme to just get some kind of into it. And I was in California at the time. So I made my phone call to my lawyer and I said, okay, I'm here now, and I will be here for a while. So send my mail here.
Didn't take long, did it?
No, a couple of days later, these guys showed up. We were in a small town, so we were able to, and the town was fairly remote, so what we did is we just checked the parking lots of all the motels to see if the car showed up. And their car did show up. And that was when things got pretty weird.
Define weird.
Well, we pulled into the parking lot of the motel where the bad guys were staying, saw their car. Instantly, this guy came out of one of the rooms who fit one of the descriptions of the guys that we had. And he instantly knew who we were, and he projected this very intense negative energy, which scared us. We then left and drove away, and I decided to send my friend back on foot just to get a closer look, and also we hadn't noticed which room number they were in, and we were going to try to identify who they were, maybe by the room number, because we knew some of the local motel owners, and we thought the motel owner might be cooperative with us. And we also wanted to double check on the car and get the plate number again.
Yeah.
And before he could even get to the motel, there suddenly appeared a guy behind him and started chasing him. My friend then ducked into a...
Are we talking about your friend?
Yeah, my friend. I was in the car. He was on foot. He ducked into a fast food restaurant and then came out the other side and was able to lose the guy. And then I caught up with my friend running down the middle of the street, and he got in the car, and we then proceeded to leave town. The guy that was chasing him literally appeared out of nowhere. He wasn't hiding behind a bush. He just suddenly was there.
Yeah, we've heard that before.
Yeah. And since that experience, I've seen things associated with the government and military appear and disappear before, and I've talked to a number of people that have had the same experiences. So it seems to be technology that the certain levels of the government have, especially with sensitive issues, sensitive sites where there is nuclear weapons. People oftentimes see military personnel appearing, disappearing, vehicles appearing, disappearing. Lately, a lot of people, which are involved in spraying with the chemtrails.
That's right.
The planes are simply vanishing. People will be watching them with binoculars, and all of a sudden the plane's not there.
We filmed some on a trip one time that it didn't leave chemtrails. It took the trails, took the trails with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to get back to you were saying, I've known you for a long time, and there was a time where I actually witnessed that, where people just appeared. Boom, here they were.
Yeah, so that was pretty scary. I wasn't prepared for that. Neither was my friend. So we then headed out to the country, to a remote location, just to get our heads clear and to try to come up with a better plan. We were both pretty young at the time, and so our choices may have not been the best ones given the circumstances. And our plan was basically to still follow through, go back, and just simply try to confront these guys and if necessary, shoot it out. We had guns. We were prepared to shoot it out. I'm sure our guns weren't as good as theirs. But at that point, confrontation would seem to be the only alternative to running and hiding.
Yeah, but it was a good choice because you're sitting here talking to us today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after we had our head clearing and decided to head back to town to confront the guys that were pursuing me, we were in a pretty remote location and off of the dirt road. We got on the dirt road and drove back to the main highway, which was still quite remote itself. When we got to the highway, there was a dark green, painted flat military dark green car. It was an older, I think it was like an older Dodge muscle car from the late 60s, early 70s. Had a big high white antenna on the back of it. All the windows were completely blacked out, even the windshield. And it was as though it was waiting for us. We pulled out on the highway, pulled in right behind us. The car I was driving, the top speed was 85. The car quickly, caught up to us, and then it pulled up alongside. We had our guns ready to go. We had the windows down and ready to start blasting away. We expected the window to come down and a machine gun to point out. That's not what happened. The car pulled in front of us and then disappeared. And a few minutes later, we started pulling into the next town, and it was getting dark. And this was about 3.5 hours later. And we'd covered a distance of about 30 miles, not able to remember how we'd gotten there.
Yeah.
And then we got to the town. We saw the car again. We decided that it was just a little too strange for us. We were going, and we didn't. You know, no one had ever seen the car before, so it was kind of a new element in the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we stopped at a gas station and we asked the gas station manager. Said, "Look, you know, is there any kind of a secret facility out there, or is this guy in the green car maybe mine security, or because it was an area that there was a lot of mining going." Could this be something that's just local? And maybe we went to the wrong place out there.
Yeah.
And the guy gave us a strange look, and he said, "Well, I suggest you call the sheriff if you've got a problem." And so we did, except we couldn't get an answer. We looked up the phone number for the sheriff's department, and there was simply no answer. Then we decided, well, maybe we'll try the highway patrol. So as I was dialing the highway patrol number, the highway patrolman pulled up behind the gas station we were at, and it was apparent he was just pulling up there to maybe go in and get something to drink or take a leak. And the green car, which at that time was passing us up and down the street, and there was another car which had joined it, they just took off. They vanished. And that was the end of it.
Now I have a question for you here. Normally, when a person's in trouble, they call the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're trying to get away from something, and yet you call the authorities. Looking back on that, how did you feel about that?
Well, we just wanted a confrontation. We wanted an end to it.
Into it. Oh,
And
that's all.
if we
I
could,
see where you're going.
and when we thought that, okay, if we can get the highway patrol to run this plate, to stop these guys, to do something, at least we'll get more answers than we had. Instead, we were simply being stalked and followed again. Yeah. And we wanted to put an end to that.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm sure the friends will understand a little better now. Thank you.
And I never did get through the highway patrol.
Well.
But the fact that the guy simply vanished was enough. And for several years, the experience was still in my memory, but I still couldn't remember what happened that day very clearly. And there was still that afternoon, the 3.5 hours and 30 miles of the drive that I simply had no recollection of. And after a few years, some memories started to come up. They started to surface. So I went to visit my friend and asked him if he was starting to remember anything different about the day. And he went and he hid in the bathroom and locked the door. And he said through the door, he said, "Yeah, but I don't want to talk about it." And I pressed him on the issue, and I said, "Well, what do you remember that's different?" And he said, "Well, the fact that that there's missing time and there's memories starting to pop up that I don't understand and I don't want to deal with it." And I said, "Well, okay, that's what's been happening to me too."
So there was no hypnosis involved at
that
this
point
from your angle. It was just
right.
Just right in your memory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Shortly after that, well, and in the meantime, in those years that followed, which was about 5 years, I had a lot of strange experiences. Occasionally a car would be parked outside my house with somebody watching the house, or strange phone calls, strange sounds on the phone, just things that gave me the feeling that I was being watched, that I was being monitored. And at that time, I really just didn't even want to think about it. So I just, tried to have a normal life. But then I got a job where I was working a lot of hours. And sometimes I would only get 3 hours of sleep a night. And this went on for 2 or 3 weeks. And I started to experience sleep deprivation. And with sleep deprivation, a person starts having the door to their subconscious opened. Yeah. And at that point, I started feeling very paranoid, started having some really bizarre images surfaced. And I felt like I really needed some help because I felt like I was starting to lose control of my own mind. So I was in LA one weekend and felt compelled to go to a specific bookstore in a specific part of LA, went to the shelf, pulled a UFO magazine off the shelf, opened it to the back, and there was an ad that jumped out of the page at me. And this little voice in my head said, you have to call this person. And this was a person that did abduction research and hypnotherapy. So I called the person, and they agreed to see me. And they then proceeded to put me under hypnosis. So I was regressed, first to some relatively safe childhood experiences, and then over the next 6 months, deeper and deeper into that particular experience. And what I remembered was that the green car didn't disappear. Instead, it emitted some kind of a beam which put me and my friend to sleep and switched my car off. My car then bumped into the back of the green car. We slowed down. They pushed the car off to the side of the road. There was then a ship, a flying saucer type ship, which landed nearby. My friend and I were both taken out of the car. Then there were these beings who, at that point, came out of the ship who did not look human. They looked part. They had some pretty strange boots on, and they had some armor-looking uniforms on. They had long claws. They did have 5 fingers, I remember. They then drug us up the ramp into the ship, where they then piloted the ship. The ship also had a human inside who was dressed in what appeared to be an Air Force uniform, very shiny black shoes, blue pants, blue shirt, but no name, badge, or or any other insignias. He was smoking a cigar. I still have a severe aversion to the smell of cigars and get.
Lilian memories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He directed the 2 reptilians, and after a few minutes, the ship took off. I remember that it vibrated pretty heavily. During the trip, we were both injected in the back of the neck twice. After the first injection, it felt like I had fire flowing through my veins. My whole body became completely numb, paralyzed. And then it felt, after the second injection, it felt like I was entering into some kind of an altered state. I was conscious, but at the same time not conscious. I believe that one was some kind of a paralyzing, anesthetizing agent, which was intended to...
Kind of like a demo.
Mm-hmm. And then the second drug was some kind of a chemical hypnosis drug, something similar to sodium amytal, perhaps.